Thank you, Noel, for that. Good afternoon, all. Very happy to be here today, and thanks to the EPA for inviting us along today to shine a light on what we do in terms of investment planning in Irish water and to peel back some of the layers in how we go about that work. So, start off with a game of Name the Treatment Plant. Would anybody like to hazard a guess? Come on, this is an easy one. Yeah. It's over there. So this is Mutton Island Wastewater Treatment Plant. You can imagine the crack we'd have in our table quizzes. This is Mutton Island Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is just down the prom here, serves Galway City. It was built in the 1990s for 90,000 population equivalent or so, and upgraded in the last number of years to about 170,000. So we are about to kick off a strategic drainage study in the Galway area shortly, which will look at the future needs for the region, for the Galway metropolitan area, and will underpin all of our investment decisions that we'll take here to ensure that we continue to cater for growth. So moving on then, I'd like to cover then in the next short while the framework in which we operate, look briefly at stakeholder expectations and investment drivers, our current investment plans, and finally finishing on plans for the future. So in terms, and the messaging that we're getting across today is that we are steadily reducing urban wastewater pressures year on year. We are driving more sustainable solutions, and there is significant investment and work required for us to meet our objectives. So that will become apparent as I go through the slides. So in terms of the framework in which we operate, the framework is set out in the Water Services Policy document, which is published by the Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And everything we do needs to hang from this. And there are three main themes within that document. There's conservation, which I suppose sustainability comes into play there in terms of how we do our work and are protecting our sources. There's future-proofing, which means we have to provide for growth and remain compliant while doing so. And then there's quality, which is all our compliance-related work. We then generate a water services strategic plan every 5 years, which sets out our ambitions and targets, what we need to do. And all of our plans and policies and strategies flow from this. Like, for example, we have our sustainability framework, which has been recently prepared. And that has targets for net zero carbon by 2040. For example, it also has a target for installed renewables for 40% of our energy usage by 2035, and also net positive biodiversity by 2030. In terms of our funding, we set out a strategic funding plan, which goes to the Minister again. It's submitted to the Minister for approval. And that sets out our funding requirements from a capital expenditure perspective and also from an operations expenditure perspective. We then need to generate our capital investment plans, and that is submitted to the financial regulator, which is the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities. And that regulator approves our capital investment plans. So each step along the way, we have to go through a series of processes which require approval. So it's quite a rigid process. In terms of our remit, we speak about source to tap and sink to sea. So Irish Water's remit covers the abstraction of water, its treatment and its distribution. We then look at the collection of wastewater and its treatment at wastewater treatment plants before returning to the environment. Nationally, from a wastewater asset-based perspective, we operate, maintain and upgrade about 26,000 kilometres of sewer network. There are about 2,200 wastewater pumping stations and over 1,000 wastewater treatment plants. And the largest of these is Ringsend in Dublin City, which has been upgraded to 2.1 million PE at the moment. It's almost 5 times the size of the next wastewater treatment plant, which is in Cork City. We have a number of very large plants in the city areas, as you'd imagine, Limerick, Galway, Waterford. There's a number of large plants around the Dublin area as well. And all the way down to the very small plants, plants that would serve a handful of houses in effect. In fact, almost half of our wastewater treatment plants are less than 500 people, so that presents their own challenge. In terms then of stakeholder expectations, we have wide engagement and interaction with multiple stakeholders across the board, and their needs and their requirements are vast, varied, and they're often competing. I suppose this diagram that's on the left-hand side is a bit of a, I suppose it's a bit of a minefield, because as soon as you put something like that up, you realise that you have missed some entities, and I know even this morning I can name 2 straight away that I've missed off that. I may as well name them now. There's Nice, apologies, and so on. My apologies not including there, and I'm sure there are others. And you'll also see that I've listed them alphabetically. I did try at the start to put them in some kind of order, but I quickly abandoned that. But of course, the EPA is number 1 on that list. The challenge for us really then is striking the balance between customer or social needs and environmental needs while delivering economic value and economic growth. Going one side, more to one side than the other, has a significant impact on how investment plans are made up. So, looking then at the drivers for wastewater investment, in terms of I suppose the reasons why we put forward projects, fundamentally we're bound by national legislation, in this case the urban wastewater regulations and the wastewater discharge authorizations. And that's our fundamental requirement, to be compliant with these regulations. And the EPA as the competent authority in this regard, and I know Jim will cover this in the next session, we must be complying with our discharge licenses and sorts of authorization. This legislation is coming from directives within Europe. The primary ones are the Water Framework Directive and the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. There are other directives that play in piece of legislation that come in here as well. We also have to consider the Green Deal from a European perspective, and the revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is one that we're keeping a very close eye on, and that's due to come into play in the next year or two, and that the impacts of that we're looking at very closely. So in terms of drivers then, we can break out the drivers into different areas on the right-hand side of the slide. The Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, from our perspective, is one of the primary drivers we have. We must be compliant with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. It is one of the minimum requirements that we have. The European Commission is taking an infringement case against Ireland for non-compliance with this directive. So it's one that we have to ensure that we're on top of. Related then are the untreated agglomerations. Now, we'd hear a lot about these each year. These are the agglomerations that do not have wastewater treatment plants. So there are 50 of those at the moment in total, and I'll go into a bit more detail on those in the next slide. The EPA then publish a priority areas list, or the PAL as we like to call it. And that's published every 6 months, and that sets out the environmental priorities that the EPA would see, and we're working hard to address those. We have the River Basin Management Plan, which we're talking about a lot today. So that's a key influence in how we bring projects forward and identify investment. Another key area for us is capacity for growth. Housing for all is one of the national strategies that we support in a big way in the work we do. And all of this then, I suppose, across the board is that any work we do, we have to ensure that we're in compliance with our licenses and our certificates of authorization. So moving on to the next stage then is the capital investment plans. And I suppose the primary purpose here is that the investment planning process is set out in legislation, and we must follow prescribed steps when we develop our investment plans. I've mentioned the strategic funding plan already. So that's our first step in the process, where we get our strategic funding plan approved by the Minister. We then develop our investment plan itself, and we do that through consultation with the EPA and with the regional assemblies, the planning authorities. And once that piece is done, then it's submitted to the regulator, the CRU, our financial regulator, should I say. And the financial regulator then goes through their own set of consultations, public consultations, and at the end of all that process then, we have the investment plan approved and we move forward. So you can see there the top line of the table sets out the investment planning periods that we've had to date and where we are at the moment. So we started off with 2 interim periods, and the I there in the IRC is interim. So we've had interim revenue control 1, so that's the IRC, interim revenue control 2, and we're now in the full 5-year cycle of revenue control period 3. And we're almost exactly halfway through. In fact, the end of next month, I think, is the halfway point. And that's running from 2020 until 2024, and then we'll move into RC4, which is 25 to 29. And we're currently in the process of planning for RC4 at present. Second line then is showing how the cycles of the river basin management plans line up with that. So cycle 3 is starting in 22, and it's roughly halfway within our current investment period. And then all of the work we do then sits in under the NDP, which has been referenced this morning in some of the slides. And the current NDP period, National Development Plan period, is between 2021 and 2030. So looking at the work we've done to date, from 2014 to 2021, so over that 8-year period for wastewater investment, we have spent in the region of about €2 billion, which is a very significant spend. In that time, some headlines, so that covers all of our maintenance replacement work, all of our capital investment work in wastewater treatment plants and within our wastewater sewer network. So I mentioned the infringement case that the Commission is taking against Ireland in relation to the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So by 2021, we had 20 of the 28 agglomerations in question brought into compliance. And the balance, the remaining 8, there's work ongoing on those, and we expect to have those projects complete within the next short number of years. There were 137 wastewater treatment plant, individual treatment plant upgrades completed in that period, and these are all listed in the appendix of the second cycle of the RBMP. The 50 untreated agglomerations, they were all progressed during that 8-year period, and 17 were completed. And the balance of those are due to be completed in the next short number of years. 149 sites were removed from the PAL in that period, and 530 kilometres of sewer network were either surveyed, rehabilitated, or installed new. We've had these numbers as well in terms of the urban pressures, the urban wastewater pressures between the second and third cycle of the RBMP. So we've gone from 291 to 208. So we're making, I suppose we're making progress in terms of the numbers, and we're making consistent progress, and that is certainly our plan as we move forward to continue to address pressures. So then moving into plans for the future. So I suppose it's a big part of what we do is plan for the future. We need to understand what our needs are today and into the future and plan accordingly. And in terms of our needs today, we know where we're non-compliant. We know what treatment plants are not meeting their discharge standards. We know what treatment plants are currently overloaded. We publish our wastewater capacity registers now on a yearly basis, and they're available on our website. So it's very clear those wastewater treatment plants that are currently overloaded, i.e. they don't have capacity for new load to be connected. So we know all those things, and we know what type of work we need to do to address those. We forecast then into the future. We look at a time frame over which we forecast. We take standardized growth rates. We consult with the planning authorities. We have a forward planning team, which sole purpose is I suppose, interfacing with the planning authorities and ensuring that our plans for our upgrades align with the needs of the individual settlements. So bringing all those together, we also take on board the experience we've gained to date. We've a significant amount of work done at this point over the period of time. We've a lot of data on costs. We understand what type of upgrades are required to meet particular objectives. And I suppose we understand the timeframes involved, and that's something that we've come to understand a lot more over the years. Bringing all those together allows us to effectively understand the scale of what's involved. And the scale is significant. Like starting off there with the big headline number, the total wastewater capital investment needs for water treatment for wastewater treatment and wastewater networks is in excess of 15 billion. So that's a significant investment required to address all of the wastewater needs across the country. As I mentioned about the directive, we will be in compliance with the directive within the next short number of years. And we will have finished the untreated agglomerations in the next short number of years. I've managed to get to slide 15 in my deck without showing a graph. So here's my graph, but you'll be glad to hear it's the only one I have. I suppose the main point of the graph really is the quantum of work. The blue line there shows the number of projects under each category. So the directive, with a very small number of projects left. Untreated agglomerations, a very small number of projects left. Third cycle river basin management plan, we estimate we'd have probably 150 projects or thereabouts to complete. And all other needs, that's all compliance needs today and into a period into the future. And all of our growth project needs. And you can see there's almost 600 projects required there. The green bars then in the chart represent just the impact in terms of population equivalent served. So as you'd imagine, the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, you've Rings End sitting in there, so that takes up a big chunk of that. The untreated agglomerations impacts about 30,000, so it's a relatively low impact in terms of the population served. The third cycle RBMP is in the region of 800,000, and the all other needs then are about 1.1 million or thereabouts. The estimated investment for individual projects relating to those are in the region of about 5.5 billion. Now that doesn't include the significant spend that's required to maintain our existing assets. So to maintain the level of service that we have at the moment, that if we don't maintain those assets, replace assets that are failing, replace assets that have come to their natural end of life, you need to go back in and replace those just to maintain that level of service. If we don't do that, then you start falling off in terms of service. So there's, I suppose, a lot of information in that chart, in that slide, but that's certainly the picture of where we are at present. In terms of the improvements that we expect we'll be delivering for the third cycle, there's about 3.7 billion of investment within RC3 that will carry over into RC4. We say carry over, what we mean there is that projects that have started in RC3 in the current investment period and will continue on and be completed within the next investment period. We expect to reduce the number of urban wastewater pressures by about 50 at least. And we have initiatives running such as the National Recovery and Resilience Plan funding, which has come through the European Recovery and Resilience Facility, that Ireland got a tranche of funding under that. So we have a number of projects running within that initiative. And then we talk about the phosphorus removal programme, because some of the interventions that we will carry out are very targeted. So if we know that phosphorus is the critical parameter or the critical nutrient at play in a given water body, we can address that via phosphorus removal programme. The drainage area plans then within the wastewater networks are another big part. I mentioned the strategic drainage study here in Galway. There's one going to happen in Cork as well, in line with that. And I suppose a big part here is the catchment approach, and we are very keen to partner with our catchment stakeholders to ensure that we're able to address the overall catchment issues. We're doing a huge amount of work in terms of urban wastewater, but we want to work with our catchment partners, as we say, to try to, I suppose, achieve what we can from an overall catchment perspective. In terms of, I'm just coming to the end of my time now, so in terms of the scale of the work to be done, we have to look at nature-based solutions as one of the big things we need to do, and we are doing a lot of work in this area in terms of integrated constructed wetlands from a treatment perspective. They deliver multiple benefits. We have a research and innovation program that's running and will deliver benefits in RC4. Within the wastewater network side, massive spend required here in the Dublin city centre areas and the Cork city, so we need to look at ways of delivering this in a more sustainable way. And we welcome mention there of the sustainable urban drainage systems, and we welcome measures identified in that. And then just to sum up very briefly, we know there's a lot to do, but I think the message we'd like to give that we're ready, we're able. We have a team of very, very motivated people within Irish Water, driven to do what's right, and we're looking forward to the challenges ahead. So thank you very much.